In the Christian world, today is the feast of the Ascension of Jesus. It's a Thursday, actually, but the Sunday following is typically the one in which it's done. And the most, the best account of the Ascension actually is found in Luke, but not in Luke's Gospel, but in the Acts of the Apostles. So I want to just give you a little bit of background. Luke is the only writer in the Scriptures who is not Jewish. In the Old Testament or the New Testament, everybody is Jewish except Luke. And Luke writes two books, or one book in two pieces. And he dedicates both of them to somebody called Theophilus. And Theophilus literally means in Greek, God lover. So the scholars are debating whether or not he was addressing his books to an existing Roman governor whose name was Theophilus, and trying to impress upon Theophilus that Christianity did not represent any kind of a political threat to Rome. In fact, in Luke's Gospel, even Pilate is trying to excuse Jesus and let him off the hook. And so at the beginning of the Gospel is an interesting story which Luke creates in the sense of, in the form of a single journey of Jesus from a nothing little place called Nazareth in Galilee down to the center of the Jewish world, which is Jerusalem. So his Gospel begins in Nazareth and goes all the way to Jerusalem, ends in Jerusalem. And then the Acts of the Apostles begins in this little podunk corner of the Roman Empire called Israel. And it ends up at the center of the Roman Empire in Rome itself. So that's how he does it. But he ends the Gospel account with a short account of Ascension, and he begins his Acts of the Apostles with a bigger account of Ascension. So I'm going to read from the Acts of the Apostles. In my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and to teach until the day he was taken up to heaven, after giving instructions through the Holy Spirit to the apostles he had chosen. After his suffering, he presented himself to them and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God. On one occasion, while he was eating with them, he gave them this command: "Do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift of my Father's promise, which you have heard me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." Then they gathered round him and asked him, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" He said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." After he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way that you have seen him go into heaven." Then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day's journey from the city. Words inspired by God. 2 weeks ago, on May the 2nd, I intended to give 2 homilies on Ascension so that today we could have a Q&A about Ascension. And so I gave the first homily on Ascension on May 2nd. But then midway through the week afterwards, I suddenly realized that last Sunday was going to be Mother's Day. So I had to do a complete pivot, and I did a homily last Sunday on mothers. So today I find myself in a little bit of a predicament because I'm going to do a Q&A and a recap on 2 totally different themes: Ascension and motherhood. And so in some senses, it'll just maybe give us more stuff to talk about or to kind of for our Q&A and our discussion today. So I'm going to just divide my presentation, my recapping, into 2 sections. A recap of the Ascension homily from 2 weeks ago, and a recap of the motherhood homily, which I gave last week. So let me begin with the Ascension. I talked about what I call an Ascension Project. And I was interested not just in the ascension of Jesus, Not just the fact that 40 days after he had risen from the dead, he ascended and was taken out of the sight of the apostles, just as we read in the Acts of the Apostles this morning. But I wanted to make the claim that there's actually a bigger ascension project going on. It's the ascension of the entire species in some senses. And I believe that there were 3 tracks I wanted to talk about. The first one is the ascension journey of the individual soul in just one particular incarnation. That in the course of this one lifetime, there's an ascension process going on in your life. Particularly if you're living mindfully and spiritually, you're going to see a very important spiritual and esoteric, evolution in your own life in the course of a single lifetime. That would be track number 1. Track number 2 would be your journey over many, many different incarnations. How you move from incarnation to incarnation, building upon what you've previously developed and how you've grown. And then I wanted to talk about track number 3 was to take the entire cosmos itself, the entire universe, all sentient beings, and watch how there's an ascension process happening for everybody. Now, I didn't get to the third one because of last Sunday being Mother's Day. And so I focused on the first 2. What happens to you in the course of a single incarnation and what happens to you over the course of many, many incarnations. I talked about the fact that all cultures celebrate the individual journey with the rites of passage, or what are sometimes called sacraments. Every single culture does that. It marks the evolution from the infant all the way through death with particular kinds of rites of passage. And the object is to try to align nature and culture, to align the cosmic and the individual. And I gave you my own definition of a rite of passage or a sacrament. I would define a sacrament as the mindful ritualizing of the significant shifts in both the status and the obligations of the initiate in the wider community. So the rites of passage are celebrating the fact that the individual person is moving and they're being given greater status at various stages and also greater responsibilities. And I made the suggestion that, in my experience, I could divide up the human journey into 23 rites of passage. 20 of them happening in the course of a single incarnation, and the last 3 after we've incarnated many, many, many times. And I went very, very briefly through those 23. So I'll try to recap them as best I can this morning. So my belief system was that the very first sacrament is the sacrament of God's self-fracturing, what the Hebrews will call nitzotzim, the sparks of the divine. And in fact, it came through in the readings this morning, which I hadn't chosen. Lawrence had chosen them, the same notion, the sparks of the divine. So the first sacrament is God's self-fracturing into holographic fractals of the self. Sacrament number 2, I believe, was some of these fractals volunteered for incarnation. And I said, there's more joy in heaven over one soul who volunteers for incarnation than 99 souls who are too fearful to attempt it. Sacrament number 3, I believe, was the launching pad, where souls literally parachute into incarnation in various dimensions, some of them physical, some of them non-physical, some of them planet Earth and others elsewhere. Number 4, I believe, was the soul, the individual soul then docks with the developing embryo or fetus in the womb of the mother. So the docking is sacrament number 4. Number 5 then will be the first breath and the birth of the baby, announcing its arrival to the community. Number 6, I believe, was the development of the ego, which happens around the age of about 8 months. And at this stage, the baby is now beginning to separate out and to realize there's not just a mother-child complex, there are 2 of us. And the child, in order to protect itself against this horrible realization that there are 2 of us and the other part is in charge of me, I'm not in charge of her. And so we develop all these defense mechanisms. Number 7 happens around age 1, when we become Homo erectus. We've been crawling on the ground. We had been marine creatures in the womb, swimming in the amniotic fluid. Then we get born and we're kind of like amphibians crawling around on all 4s. Now, around age 1, we become Homo erectus. We stand upright. Number 8, we become Homo sapiens. We're beginning to speak and to articulate. Number 9 is the no period. No, mine, me, where we further differentiate ourselves even from our parents. And so this is the ongoing separation from source that began with God's self-fracturing and will only end at the very end when we merge again with source. So that would be like number 9. Number 10 happens around age 7 when we begin to think rationally. And now we learn rules and roles. Here are the rules of our society, or here are the rules when you're in school, or here are the rules when you're at home, and here's the assigned role that you have to play because of who you are. So that happens around age 7. Around age 12 is when we become sexually mature. And now we become conduits capable of, incarnating new life, becoming the vehicles through which other souls can incarnate into planet Earth through us. At this stage as well, the next sacrament is the self-reflection. And this is very different. We can kind of, reflect on our own behavior and on the behavior of the tribe. And at this stage, we begin questioning the tribal stories, whether they're kind of historical stories, or whether they're cosmological stories, or whether they're theological stories. We begin to question all of those. And we're moving now from a kind of, from initially we're egocentric, and then we become ethnocentric, the tribal affiliation, and now we're becoming world-centric. We're thinking beyond the tribe. Sacrament number 13, I believe, will be the first romantic friendship, kind of trial and error with intimacy, trying to align with another person, and in some senses, let go of ego to some extent. Number 14 would be the first long-term committed relationship leading to some kind of a socially sanctioned union. Number 15 would be the adoption of a profession. We finished our schooling or our education in some way, and now we're contributing to society in some way. Number 16 would be the birth of the first child. And now we begin to regress a little bit. Our world-centric thinking now shrinks down to this little nuclear family and protecting the family. So we shrink a little bit in our sense of the world. Number 17 would be the birth of the first grandchild. And now a real grandparent is beginning to realize that all the children of the planet are equally beloved, and to be, to reach out and to try to be available and make a difference in the lives of all children everywhere in the planet. Number 18 would be this beautiful Native American Indian statement where they talk about all my relations. And when a Native American Indian talks about all my relationships, she's not talking about her aunts and her uncles and her grandmother. She's talking about all sentient beings, everything that lives on the planet with us. And so now our concern is for all sentient beings. Sacrament number 19, I believe, is the beginning of the Enlightenment process. And Enlightenment for me is not a toggle switch on or off. You're either enlightened or you're not enlightened. It's not that. It's a dimmer switch where you can increase the luminescence, in various ways. So the Enlightenment process, ramps up significantly with this one. And we begin to laugh at the illusions under which we've lived the incarnation. To realize that we've been sold a bill of goods by the churches, by the politicians, by the economic models, and we begin to laugh, not derisively, but at ourselves, that we really bought into all of that we identified with our spacesuits rather than our core being. And then number 20, I believe, is the sacrament of death, where we shuffle off this mortal coil and we begin to identify with the soul rather than the spacesuit. So that was the first track I covered then, the journey of an individual in the course of a single lifetime. The second track I covered then was the journey of the individual over many, many, many lifetimes. And I made the claim that when Jesus very famously says to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, unless you become as little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven, unless a man is born again of water and the Spirit. And I believe that actually is a reference to reincarnation. That unless you've been on the planet many, many, many times, you cannot understand the human experience. If you've only been, in one gender, in one cultural group, in one area of the planet for one lifetime, you haven't understood what life on planet Earth is about until you've savored it in many, many different guises. So reincarnation for me is being born again and again and again until finally you learn to love in all circumstances, that the limitations of gender or ethnicity or skin color or educational attainment or IQ level or religious affiliation, you've outgrown all of these things and you begin to realize your core essence. And when Christ says, unless you become as little children, I suggested that what he's talking about is little children's curiosity, their ability to ask really good questions, their ability to forgive, even very, very difficult childhood. The fact that they're born prejudice-free. They have to be taught to be prejudiced. The fact that they live completely in the present moment. And finally, that they live in their imaginations. The ability to shift dimensions and interact with beings and energies in other levels interact and learn from them. So that led then to the last 3 sacraments, I believe, which only can happen after many, many incarnations. And number 21 then would be that you have reached heaven. You've died at the end of 1 incarnation, and now you reached heaven. But your capacity for love is not exhausted by the fact that you've arrived and said, I made it. Your capacity to love is infinite because you're a holographic fractal of source. And so you take the bodhisattva vow. You walked off all your own personal karma, but you decide to come back to try to wake up the rest of us, all of us who are still asleep. That's sacrament number 21. Number 22 then is, once more, you parachute into incarnation with all the amnesia created by incarnation. But you're going to hit the ground running at this stage. Very, very, very quickly, you're going to begin to remember who you really are and who other people are. And you'll operate from that principle. And then the final sacrament, when the game of Laila is done, as Hinduism says it, and all souls merge back into source, in the way in which individual waves washing along the beach retract and become part of the ocean. They were never separate from the ocean to begin with. It was an illusion to think that they were separate. And now they go back into the bosom of Mother Ocean. So that was the first homily I gave on the Ascension process. Last Sunday, then I talked about Mother's Day. And I believe that motherhood is the ultimate Eucharist. It's the reason why Jesus chose this extraordinary symbol at the Last Supper, where he said he was going to feed us from his own body and blood, which is precisely what every mother does. Every mother literally builds us from her own body and blood, and then once we've been born, puts us on her breast and feeds her from her own body. And I made the suggestion that Mother Earth, Gaia, is the ultimate Earth Mother who offers us Eucharist every single day. She's feeding us from her own body every single day. Not only is she feeding us from her own body, she's clothing us from her own body. There's no place, there's nothing you're wearing which didn't come from Mother Earth. And she gives us shelter. There's no place you're living which did not come from Mother Earth. Whether you're living in a cave or in a high rise, all the materials were contributed by Mother Earth. And unfortunately, our response has been terrible. We've gone from agriculture to agribusiness, where we've polluted, her breath and her spirit, the air we breathe. We polluted her body, which is the earth on which we reside. We polluted her bloodstream, which is our water systems. We've ravaged instead of replaced. And again, I went back to the notion of Eucharist, that everywhere in the Bible that you find 4 phrases, these 4 phrases, you find yourself in the presence of a Eucharistic encounter, where Jesus took, blessed, broke, and distributed. Taking is about receiving with gratitude. Blessing is about recognizing the inherent sanctity of everything that is. You're not just, taking an inert substance, and offering it some kind of an upgrade. Breaking has to do with the intention to distribute the resources to everybody, and then distributing is actually walking the talk. And that's what Jesus did in Eucharist, and that's what Pachamama, our Gaia, does with us. And we're invited to respond by taking with gratitude, not grabbing her as resources, by recognizing the inherent blessedness of what she's offered, by breaking it in the sense of being ready to distribute the resources to all who need, and then finally by walking the talk. And I suggested that the Celts and Buddhism understood this, that the Celtic world, was a dance between nature and nurture, between mystery and manifestation. And in the Buddhist world, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. That it is out of the nothingness of the womb that all manifestation emerges. And that every manifestation, in some senses, when you break it apart, there is nothing there. If you took away, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, you take a flower and you take away the sunlight and the air and the water and the nutrients, you don't have a flower. So form is emptiness, is composed of things that do not exist in some senses. So that's what I said about, Mother Gaia. Then I talked about Mother Mary. And if you remember, I trawled the New Testament for encounters between Jesus and his mother. And I arranged them chronologically. And I created it in the form of a kind of a diary that Mother Mary was keeping. So I wrote it in her own words. And I started with the Annunciation and ended with the Ascension. And I suggested that the Annunciation was Mary's incarnated yes to the preconception contract that she and the soul who would be known as Jesus, her son, had made. I'm suggesting that all of us make preconception contracts, and that all of the people you encounter in your life are there because you chose to be together for the purposes of a particular mission. So the Annunciation was her verbalized, articulated, incarnated yes to the preconception contract. The birth of her son wasn't just, a mother birthing a little boy, but rather it was partners dancing in a divine way to try to awaken Christ consciousness on the planet. They didn't just have a mother-son relationship. They were dance partners in a cosmic, orchestrated symphony to create Christ consciousness in their world. Then I went to the presentation in the temple where, they go to the temple in Jerusalem to offer, make a presentation of the baby Jesus at age 8 days. And an old man, Simeon, takes the child, blesses the child, and then says to Mary, "Your own soul a sword shall pierce." The cost of being the mother of God, the cost of this contract was huge for Mary. It wasn't all, roses for her. At age 12, then you have the story of Jesus being lost in the temple. And he's missing for 3 days, and they're really upset when they find him. And he says to them, "Didn't you realize I had to be about my Father's business in my Father's house?" And we were told that Mary went back to Nazareth, and she pondered all these things in her heart. Because even though she had made the contract, there's amnesia for all of us. We don't know the timing, and we don't know the bifurcation points on the road ahead. We have to, event by event, make the choices for the future throughout our lifespan. Every day brings a new set of choices. Are we going to choose love and compassion, or choose fear and anxiety? So this was an opportunity for her to revisit the anxiety she was experiencing and realize there was a purpose to this. I talked about in Mark's Gospel in chapter 3 in verses 21 and 31, where when Jesus, this quiet, nice carpenter from Nazareth, started his public ministry, his extended family freaked out. They thought he'd flipped his, they thought he was mad. And we are told in Mark chapter 3, verse 21, they came to take him by force because they thought he was mad. And when he wouldn't talk to them, they got his mother and said, "Can you talk some sense to him?" And Mary comes back in chapter 3, verse 31, and we're told she was outside the house. There's a huge crowd inside the house. She can't get in where Jesus is. She sends a message in, "Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside, and they want to talk to you." And Jesus says, "Who's my mother? And who are my brothers and sisters?" I'll tell you who my mother is and who my brothers and sisters are. My mother and my brothers and sisters are those who hear the word of God and follow it. Now, sometimes we think that this is a put down of his mother. It was actually an exaltation. He says, if you want to really know who my mother really is, she's not just the woman standing outside the door, wanting to talk to me. She's somebody who heard the word of God and said yes as a little girl and has followed it every day of her life. He's exalting this mother. But in the meantime, Mary is trying to figure out, is this the time? Is this when it's supposed to happen? And the next story I told was from John chapter 2, the wedding feast of Cana, where 3 days into the feasting, the young couple run out of wine and they're going to be really, really embarrassed. And Mary comes to Jesus and says, "They've run out of wine." And Jesus says, "Okay, why is that a concern of mine?" And Mary says, "I'm overruling you. Time to start." Christ says, "I'm not ready to begin my miracle career yet." And Mary says, "Oh yes, you are." And then she turns to the steward and says, whatever he tells you to do, do it. So Mary, who had pushed him into physical life, 30 years before, is now pushing him into his public ministry of miracles at this stage. And then we have the terrible story of Mary standing at the foot of the cross and watching this extraordinary child of hers, be tortured in an extraordinary, vicious manner and giving up the breath. And the last words he speaks are to try to make sure she's taken care of. He nods his head towards the disciple John and says, "Son, behold your mother, Mary. And to Mary, Mary, behold your son." And we were told from that day on, John took her into his home. And it was a long time. It would be 30 years before Mary herself would die. And so at the Ascension, we've just talked today, she's watching her son ascend. In some senses, this is the last time she's going to make physical contact with him for 30 or 40 years, as she lives to be an old woman. So there's a separation involved there. So for Mother Mary, it's a series of extraordinary triumphs and extraordinary sadness. Her own soul indeed was pierced many, many times in the course of her lifetime. And I ended last Sunday by talking about what I call Mater Dolorosa, the grieving mother, which you see in the Pietà, with the body of our dead son draped over our arms as he's taken down from the cross. And I dedicated last Sunday's Mass to all mothers who have lost children, whether it happened through a miscarriage or a stillbirth or an accident or warfare or suicide or an illness, however they've lost their children. I dedicated that Mass to those Mater Dolorosas. And I ended by talking about death then appears to be the ultimate separation, but it's merely separation from the illusion that I am the spacesuit. That's what death really consists of. And I said that where the first breath is the affirming cry of commitment to the incarnational mission, I took a statement of Neil Armstrong from July of 1969, and I opined that the last breath is one small step for the spacesuit, one giant leap for the soul. So that's a synopsis of the last two homilies. So we'll open it up now to Q&A.
I have a two-part question, and one is, the first one is there a net increase of souls on Earth, meaning, soul, or maybe souls having human incarnation experiences, or is it just a rearrangement of different life forms, algae, fish, plants, whatever, that are choosing to have this human reincarnation experience, or perhaps from other worlds? So that's something I think about. But then the other part is my mission. My understanding is that we choose to reincarnate because we have a mission to fulfill. But yet it's so murky once we're born, and we struggle to know what that is. And just personally, sometimes I find it darn hard to stay awake. and so being so difficult to remember what my mission is, and sometimes just to stay awake. I guess my question is, am I trying too hard? If the mission is going to happen, or I'm not sure if I'm articulating that well, but it's just like, why do we choose a mission if we don't know what it is? Or it's hard to remember what it is. So,
two great questions, Chris. So the first one, the number of souls on planet Earth. It's important to raise, it's been statistically, statistics can regress us into a statistical regression. So we estimate that there have been 111 billion souls on planet Earth since the advent of Homo sapiens sapiens 70,000 years ago. So that 111 billion different souls. But if there's reincarnation, you could shrink that number down very, very significantly. If, as the reincarnational literature suggests, that we reincarnate probably about every 200 years, so you could shrink that number down very, very significantly to a lesser number. So that's the first answer to the first question you've asked. The second thing is that I believe that, souls incarnate all over the universe, in physical planets and in non-physical forms as well. But souls are attracted where the opportunity for growth is magnified. If there are, let's say there are 10 movie theaters in Palo Alto, and there's a blockbuster in one of the movie theaters and the others are showing kind of ho-hum movies, you're going to get a line at that movie and there's almost nobody attending the other ones. Planet Earth, in the last few millennia is really on the cutting edge of extraordinary change. So souls who are interested in significant improvement are lining up to come to planet Earth. But it's a very difficult planet. I believe it's the boot camp of the galaxy. Only really courageous souls sign up for incarnation on planet Earth, because they know your own soul, a sword will pierce. That's the guarantee if you sign up for incarnation on planet Earth. So there's a huge influx of souls wanting to make significant progress, which is why we're seeing, the population that we do. And so, but there are other souls all over the cosmos, and a soul at the end of its incarnation can choose to incarnate in any other form it chooses. So that's your first question. The second question then about a mission. Why is it that we forget? Because, part of the mission is actually to discover what the mission is. It's like if you were given a test, a math test, and you were provided with all the answers before the test began, there's no reason for you to learn the material because you have the answers right there. So discovering the mission is part of it. And in discovering it, that's how we come awake. So how do we discover the mission, or what are some of the kind of the clues? Firstly, look at your talents. Your talents are a clue as to what the mission is. Look at your fears. What are you afraid of? What scares you? That's also something. As well as that, I believe that there's a big difference when we incarnate between, there are two kinds of gifts we come with. The first kind of gifts are our talents, but they do not belong to us. We're like a mailman with a bag of letters. Even though the letters are in the mailman's bag, they don't belong to the mailman. They belong to the people whose names are on the envelopes. And therefore, any talent you have belongs to the world. You came to share with the world. But most of us, we hug them. We believe they belong to us, And while we're entitled to make a living from them, we are not entitled to make a killing from them. So whether the talent is a musical ability, an athletic ability, whatever it is, you were given these in order to kind of help the world. But you came with a second kind of gift as well. And these are your problems. Every single one of us chose particular problems because they were the kind of the impetus to grow and to evolve. And what we do with these, we tend to project these on other people. Say, I'm not an angry person. He's an angry person. He's making me angry. And so what we do is we hog the talents, which we're meant to distribute, and we project the problems, which we're meant to work with. And so discovering the mission has to do with looking at the 2 or 3 most important virtues that I want to develop in my lifetime. Is it compassion? Is it courage? Is it resilience? Is it patience? What is it? When you look and you think, here's the kind of person I would like to be. Here's the kind of virtue I would really like to kind of develop further, or for the first time, right there, you've been told what your mission is. Because your mission is not to become, a biologist, or a mathematician, or a farmer, or a musician. That is not your mission. That's a profession you take, which should be in the service of your mission, but the mission itself will always be about the acquisition of virtue.
I have a question about the soul when it comes to dock in, when for little babies, and when we're leaving this earth, and in between, because I've had experiences with a little baby where they're looking at you and all of a sudden you can feel they come into consciousness. So I don't know if the soul is such a solid thing. Then I think also when people are dying, that their soul can float in and out of the body. And then also, I think the book's called Return to Forever, but if people really use a lot of drugs or alcohol, that their soul can float in and out. So, and I don't know if maybe happy occasions people do too, but those I feel like I've kind of had experiences more maybe with that, witnessing it or whatever. So just want to let you know what you think about that.
So you've asked 3 questions, Johanna. So I'm going to start with the third one. The book you're mentioning was a book called Return from Tomorrow. It's by George Ritchie, who was a psychiatrist who, as a young man at age 19, was drafted, after Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. And he was in a training camp in Texas where there was a huge outbreak of some kind of flu, and he died. And he was dead for 90 minutes. And during that period of time, he was taken on a journey. And part of his journey, he was in a bar room with a whole bunch of young soldiers and sailors, all drinking real heavily. And there's a sawdust floor. And there's this one guy walking across the room with 2 pints in his hands, and he slipped and banged his head on the ground. And as Ritchie is watching this, he says there were 2 kinds of beings present. There was live human beings, and there was other people who looked alive, but they had no auras. There was no energy field around them. Whereas the live human beings had an energy field that extended out from their physical bodies. And these others had none. And he said he saw this young soldier fall down, bang his head, and it's like his aura just shrank down to nothing. And all of a sudden, one of the other beings without an aura jumped in through the top of his head and took possession of his body. And the idea was that this discombobulated entity needed a physical body in order to indulge in addiction. And so that the third part you're talking about is addictive behavior, can significantly shift the aura and make it much, much easier for discombobulated entities to take occupation of the physical spacesuit. So that's the third part of your question. The first 2 parts then had to do with birth and death. So what about the soul who is docking? At what stage does the soul that's parachuted into incarnation actually dock with the embryo or the fetus? I believe that it can happen at any stage. I don't necessarily believe that it has to coincide with the moment of conception, that sometimes an embryo is developing, and the soul is looking at it. Is this the womb I want to enter? Is this the particular body that's going to suit my purposes? And so it may actually go in and out for a period of time. So when the mother feels the quickening, that for me is evidence that, the soul has docked either temporarily or permanently, and she experiences that quickening in her own body. She knows she's pregnant, very definitely at this stage, but that the child can come in and come out, and the soul can come in and out, and it may actually abandon its mission before it is born. So miscarriages, sometimes it's that, either this was the contract between the mother and child, that there would be a miscarriage as part of the plan, or that the soul decides, you know what, this is far too confining, I'm out of here, and leaves. And so it can be that, the soul can delay the decision to be born. The death process at the other end, then, which is the second question you'd asked, has to do with, the disidentification with this physical spacesuit and the elevation of consciousness, so that we become aware that this was literally a car I drove, for 75 or 80 or 90 years or whatever, and now I don't need this car anymore. And so at the end of life, there very definitely is a separation of the soul and the spacesuit itself. So you're absolutely right. There are many occasions in life when there's either a temporary or a permanent, dissociation between the vehicle and the driver.
I just want to say one more thing, and that at the end of that book, it talks about the guy came back to life, and he was driving across the United States, and he drove into that town and he walked into that bar. So it did exist. It was a place that, yeah. That's an interesting thing. And can we call our soul back if it's blown out?
Who is the you that would call it back? You're talking about the ego. Yeah, the soul is going to make decisions that that are much more important than the ego's choices. So the ego can't call the soul back. The soul can make a decision, and there are lots of cases in near-death experiences where people who've transitioned, and have encounters with dead relatives or with kind of, angelic figures or mentor figures, there comes a stage when they're told, you can't stay here. Your job is not yet finished. You need to go back. And then they come back. And obviously there are times when their job is finished and they die, so they don't come back. But there seems to be some kind of a choice point, in a near-death experience when the soul wants to remain at the other side, and the mentors say, you haven't fulfilled your purpose fully. You need to go back and finish it. And then the person restarts life. Yeah. But that's the decision the soul is making, not the ego.
If it's okay, can I add two more things to your response to the previous gentleman?
Go for it.
There's one other reason there's so many, the population is so high right now on the planet, is because of the changes that are coming, the earth changes that are coming in the energetic transition. There's a lot of star beings that are here right now that are volunteered. Dolores Cannon talks about this in her 3 waves. There's a lot of other entities that have may not incarnated much to Earth or at all that have come in to volunteer to help with the transition because of Gaia's call for assistance. And there's a lot of spirits that you talked about that were on the fence that decided to not incarnate. And because of the lack of available human vehicles going forward, this is now or never for a long time. So they've chosen to come in to have a physical experience before there's not going to be as many rides available, if you will, on the roller coaster.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it, Wavin. Thanks a million, bro.
You're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to share that.
I want to take your mind back to the 21st of April, 2013, where you were able to do a synopsis of your personal cosmology. And so it's apropos because part of what you talked about were avatars and Buddhas, and that the Buddhas were those of the human divinity reaching up towards God. And in that, you came up with an equation which was E is for enlightenment, A times 1 plus B times 2 plus C times 3 plus D times 4, which was under self-understanding, intelligence, wisdom, and compassion. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. So So I'm reading this and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know that we actually, I guess what I want to know is if there are degrees of enlightenment, which in other words, which is why we have to have multiple lifetimes, because I do recall you saying that they're all weighted equally, but I don't know as in humanity that we get to that point one time around where all of these parts are weighted equally. And so in order to fulfill this equation, it must mean multiple lifetimes. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you get to some degree of enlightenment in one lifetime and then another degree of enlightenment in another lifetime in order to come to that equation?
Okay, great question. So firstly, I have to blame Tom Thomas for that homily. We had lunch together at one stage, and Tom asked me, he says, how about compressing your entire cosmology into a single homily? And so I did. So thanks to Tom for that piece. Now, that equation that I created then, as I said earlier, even today, enlightenment is not a toggle switch. It's not an on-off, that you're just a dumb human being, and all of a sudden, there's blinding light and you're enlightened and you're a totally different person. Buddhism says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And so it's a dimmer switch. There are degrees of enlightenment. We get more and more enlightenment to the extent that we're more and more aware and more spiritual by our own efforts. And so enlightenment is a process extending over multiple incarnations. Nobody is going to make it in a single incarnation. So you can be, in my opinion, at least, you look at any deeply spiritual person, like a Buddha figure or a Jesus figure or a Martin Luther King, or a Mother Teresa figure. I guarantee you these are people who've been on this planet many times, and so have increased in their enlightenment process. So for us then, every lifetime is an opportunity, to be the one. There's a great statement in Messianic Judaism that says, they talk about mitzvot. A mitzvot is a mitzvah is to doing a good deed. And they say, you never know that it could be the next mitzvah, the next good deed that you do, that will be the final one that will bring the Messiah back. They're waiting still for the Messiah to arrive. You never know that it can be just this next act of kindness that can allow God to say, okay, right, that's it. I'm going to send the Messiah at this stage. So you never know what act of love on your part is going to move the switch significantly. But certainly it's going to take many, experiences in order to grow that. And I created that little formula as a way for people just to kind of check themselves. I suggested, in fact, that you could look at some historical characters and measure them on those 4 parameters and see what score you'd give them, and then measure yourself and see what score you would give yourself. So as a way of just giving yourself kind of feedback about where you stand on the enlightenment process so that you can kind of rectify the loopholes.
Yes, thanks, Seán. I did have a question. You mentioned earlier about we reincarnate back about every 200 years. And I'm thinking that there's probably a periods of time that is more concentrated in the experiences you would experience. And I kind of, to the point where my readings have been that time is actually not linear. This is just something that it works in the human brain, and it's just a convenient way of us to look at time, or to look at the now. Is that so? My feelings is that not only is the soul able to choose its soul group, its the location it chooses to come to, but also the timeline. Absolutely. Part of the timeline. Right. So is that a reasonable solution or a reasonable explanation of the soul's experience here on Earth?
Absolutely brilliant. So there's a lot of esoteric literature on this topic, Bill. And so I just hit into it in a few different places. One of them is that, depending on the nature of a person's death at the end of an incarnation, the period between lifetimes, between incarnations can be very different. That somebody who dies under very, very traumatic circumstances may actually reincarnate almost immediately. And you get lots of stories, particularly in cultures that really believe in reincarnation, like in India and Burma, places like that, that there were a lot of Japanese soldiers who died in Burma during the end of World War II, who reincarnated almost immediately, literally within days. And so that's a kind of a figure that can stretch our telescope. The second point you make then is very important. That there is no chronology. There is no time when we step out of incarnation. So I believe either we're living parallel lifetimes right now, that a character you're playing, your soul is playing now, is Bill Lang. But Bill, is just one character that you're playing in one drama, that you're playing in different dramas simultaneously, using different avatars, and that you're doing some kind of parallel processing. So chronology is an artifact of this particular state of consciousness, that we're subject to on planet Earth. But it may well be that, other lifetimes are being lived in parallel or simultaneously. And I actually believe that they sometimes, cross-fertilize each other when we're dreaming at night. And so you're going to have dreams of places you've never actually been, with characters you've never actually encountered in waking consciousness. And I believe it's actually you've dipped in temporarily, or you've kind of cross-fertilized a few different streams, parallel lives into your dream state. And so you're absolutely right. Time is an artifact of this particular state of consciousness. And looking at lifetimes chronologically, may be a nice way of organizing the data, but not particularly effective. I remember, so for instance, I've had at this stage about 11 different past life experiences, just little vignettes. And at one stage, I organized them chronologically because I knew exactly where I was and when I was in human history. And I organized them chronologically. And I began to see that it was totally random. I didn't seem to be making any progress. That I'd be a really good person in one lifetime. And then 200 years later, I was a renegade of some kind. And so it didn't make any sense to organize them chronologically if I was thinking about the evolution of my own soul. So instead of that, I looked at, where was I least developed, and where was I most developed, and tried to arrange them in that kind of a sequence having to do with the evolution of consciousness and of the soul, rather than imposing an artificial chronology, on the experiences I was having. So any of those are possibilities.
I was wondering, and this is probably very simplistic, if, and I've been thinking of this for a long time, if the number 144,000, giving glory to God, is that there were 144 original souls that journeyed to when Christ consciousness?
Okay. That's a great question, Margaret. So the number actually, you find it in the book of Revelation, and it's 144,000. Yeah, so it's a bigger number than 144. The book of Revelation is the most complicated book of the entire scripture, Old Testament and New Testament. And it's full of the symbolism of colors and animals and numbers. So in the book of Revelation, the number 3.5 is used frequently. The number 7 is used frequently. The number 12 is used frequently. And the number 40 is used frequently. And when you look at then, the number 1,000, so 144 is 12 times 12. So that's significant then. And 144,000 is now 12 by 12 by 1,000. So they're using these numbers very, very symbolically. So many, many different people have tried to unravel what is the significance of these numbers and the colors and the animals that are used. And it's very difficult to do it. But I love your theory that did this represent the original souls that came on planet Earth? Yeah. So I'm sure at some stage, as far as Homo sapiens was concerned, as soon as a species arrived that we would call Homo sapiens sapiens, there were probably very, very few in number. And if they're animated by souls, it could well be that this is a symbolic number of the original kind of tribal group from which everything else developed. Now, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because one of the readings we had today, this beautiful reading about I was a plant, and then I became, an animal, and then I became a human or whatever. There's something called the transmigration of souls. That souls continue to experiment with earth incarnations at more and more sophisticated levels. So what would it be like to experience incarnation as a daffodil? It really happens. Souls incarnate as daffodils, I'm totally convinced. What would it be, to experience incarnation as an oak tree? What would it be then to kind of experience incarnation as a squirrel? So squirrels have physical abilities, and mental abilities that a daffodil doesn't have. And so what would it be to incarnate as an elephant, with their great memory, and their love of family or whatever. And then what would it be like to incarnate as a human being? So I'm convinced. I gave a homily years and years and years ago where I talked about, the levels of souls, all the ways from single cells being animated with consciousness, all the ways up to avatars being animated by total self-awareness. And so every life form, as far as I'm concerned, on our planet is animated by a level of soul. And I think, for instance, that planet Earth itself, Gaia, is actually an extraordinarily developed soul, a soul which is much more evolved than any of the human beings, that populate it. And so, which really deserves our respect. So I think there are gradations in which souls animate more and more complex life forms. And what that allows it allows us more latitude, more free will. And there's a big difference, I say, always between free will and freedom. Free will is the ability to do as I please. Freedom is the ability to do as pleases God. And so the only truly free person is the person who instinctively chooses to do the loving thing. Anybody who chooses to do a selfish thing is exercising free will, but doesn't reach freedom yet. And so it seems to me that Source is playing the game of Lila by giving more and more free will to higher and higher life forms to figure out, will they move from free will to freedom, or will they move from free will to selfishness? So it's a much more complicated question, just the original number of human beings. Good morning, ÓLaoire.
I'm smiling because this might be a foolish question. So this notion of the transmigration of souls and ever more complexity. So what you're saying is there's always more complexity. You don't actually go backwards. Because I wonder, sometimes if I might learn something from a lifetime as a daffodil, because maybe it would teach me a little more faith and trust. But what you're saying is it's always more complex.
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, what I would say to you, you already have experienced life as a daffodil, Karen.
Oh, okay.
So you have that information already embedded in you. There's a question of, can you access it? And you can access it in many ways. You can access it through imagination. And again, I keep saying to you, imagination is not the faculty that allows us to make up stuff that's not real. It's the ability that allows us to shift our state of consciousness and access the Akashic Records. Everything you've been is recorded, including your lifetime as a daffodil and the lessons you learned as a daffodil. So you can access that. If you want to learn, beauty, how to orient towards the sun, or, whatever it is you want to learn from a daffodil, all of the information, all the data are there already. It's only a question of learning how to access them.
Okay. Can I ask one other little quick something about the Akashic Record? Every time you have a sense of having sort of tapped into the Akashic Record, can it be that it's not your particular lifetime that you've had, but that you kind of tap in a general way? Or does it always refer to you, to an experience that you've actually had?
So the Akashic Records for me are, an archive of all of the experiences all creatures have ever had in any dimension, in any world. I keep saying it's like grandmother God videotapes everything her grandkids are doing. So it's available for everybody. So it's like, to use kind of modern, kind of a metaphor, if you went on a vacation and you upload photographs of the vacation to the cloud, and then you give people the code, family members, so they can access it and download it at their end. So every experience you've had is available to all the family members to whom you've chosen to give the code. Now, grandmother God gave the code to everybody.
Okay.
All of the experiences that have ever been uploaded from any creature are available. There is no censorship whatsoever. Grandmother God is not particular. She's not interested in kind of copyright. So everything is available to everybody. So of course, you can learn from the experiences of other people as well.
Okay.
Powerful experiences I had during a lifetime regression way back in 2006, when I was on the launching pad, surrounded by other souls going into other dimensions, I found myself in a situation where every thought that every soul was having was instantly available to all of us. And the angelic being that was orchestrating this launching, was acting as a kind of a conduit for all of that information to flow instantaneously to everybody. So every single person had access to all the data important for what they were about to do. Now, the Akashic Records then are the total archives of all the experiences generated by all the beings who've ever lived, and they're available to anybody, who knows to access. There's no secret code that grandma is keeping just for special people.
So it doesn't have to be your personal experience at all.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
Okay.
I was really happy to hear something. We said that souls are not necessarily connected to the body at conception. And one of the reasons is that it never made sense to me that they were, and identical twins are an example, that at conception, there's one person, and then it splits maybe a couple days later. And something that also can happen is those two twins can come back together and become one person later, and it's called a chimera. And so there was like an accounting problem of souls. So you just fixed, it's almost like what are our taxes due tomorrow? Accounting is really on my mind lately. But there's a similar thing, somewhat similar thing that perplexes me. And that's the idea of a person leaving their body and potentially dying, and the soul making a decision, perhaps with help from mentors, as you suggested, as to whether or not to come back. But what if that body had died, but there's a decision to come back? Or the person decides not to come back, but the body lives. Okay. So how does that make sense?
Okay, so this great question, Jay. Have you heard of something called a walk-in? It's the notion that even when a person is fully awake, that the soul decides, I don't want to be in this physical container anymore. So if there's another soul who's willing to occupy this spacesuit, I'll get out and let them come in. And it's called a walk-in. So you don't have to die in order for this process to happen. You can be like as healthy as you want, but you decide, the soul decides, I fulfilled my mission. I don't want to be in this spacesuit anymore. Anybody up there who want to occupy, take my car? And the other soul says, yeah, sign me up. So the other soul comes down, takes occupancy, and the original soul leaves. And it's called a walk-in in the literature.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you can use it as a kind of a suit of clothes or a car. I don't like my car anymore. I want to buy a different car. Anybody interested in my car? And somebody says, yeah, I'll buy it. So somebody else buys the car. So this is just a car or a spacesuit. The soul is not identified with it. We're identified. We think I am the spacesuit, but we're not. It's a car I'm driving or a suit of clothes I'm wearing. But when the soul or the driver decides I'm out of here, it can leave at a moment's notice. And if it's a nice vehicle, somebody else wants to occupy it, that's fine.
But what happens if you decide to come back, but the body has died?
Well, the thing is, the soul itself is working with mentors of various kinds. And a soul is going to make, under the guidance of the mentors, the best possible decision for the evolution of that soul. Now, souls can override the mentors. We can have an exaggerated idea of our own ability. And so we can take on, a job that we're not actually adequate to. But I would say that's very, very, very unusual, that the vast bulk of souls will defer to the mentors. And the mentors know precisely, when the exit point has arrived, or whether or not you need to come back in after a near-death experience. It's very unusual that the soul would override the mentoring.
In the last couple of weeks, I've been disturbed and perplexed by seeing on the news seeing pictures of children in Yemen and Syria, refugee children or children who couldn't get care and are starving to death or have bad medical care, etc. And this one little boy in particular, and being a mother and having lost a child, maybe that's why I'm experiencing that. But I don't really sometimes understand why they would reincarnate into this type of a body, or what is their circumstance, like with the refugees. Why is that? What is their purpose and what is their mission in that short lifetime?
Okay. That's a great question. So it's very important for us to realize, what does it mean to sign up for an incarnation? I've talked about this many times in the past. There's a branch of psychology called psychodrama. And psychodrama is a system where, let's say I'm a therapist and I'm working with 4 different clients, all of whom have different issues that they're working on. And I suggest that we do some joint session, that the 5 of us do a joint session. So I put them on stage and I create an artificial kind of a starting point. And I get them to deal with that. So this is what I've said before. I put 4 people on stage. I say to the first person, you're the mother in this family, and you're an engineer, a very, very busy woman. You're the father in this family, and you're a farmer and you're working long hours every day. You're the son in this family and you're a football star. You're the quarterback for the school. And you're the daughter in this family, you're in junior in high school, but you've developed a drug dependency and you've just been kicked out of school for doing drugs in school. And now, the family's getting together to discuss this issue. And I put them up on stage. So each of them has a role, and we just start with an initial scenario. And I put them on stage. I say, okay, get on with it. Now, in the absence of a script, or a plot, there's no plot here. There's no script here. There's just an initial circumstance and 4 assigned roles. Now get on and create a drama out of this. And what happens is they're going to have to depend on their own life experiences. So some person will say something, the other people will respond to that, and very, very quickly the drama emerges. But it's a drama which has been driven by their own real life experiences. It wasn't scripted. It's not a plot. Now, and then you can tell a lot about people's individual pathologies given how they handle themselves in this imaginary scenario. Now, I believe that when souls incarnate, they know 2 things. They know their own personal history, how they've behaved in previous incarnations, and therefore what their strengths and weaknesses are. And they know the personal histories of all of the people who are going to be significant in their lifetimes. And they know what their mission is. So 3 things. Mm-hmm. My own history, the history of the people I'm coming in with, and my purpose here. And then I sign up. But there's no guarantees. They didn't come down here in order to be refugees. They didn't come down here to be kind of Holocaust victims. They came down with a group of players, knowing the track histories of all of the players, and knowing that they came to develop, compassion or resilience or patience or courage, whatever. And so they're given this psychodrama. There's no plot and there's no script. They're just a group of souls with past histories, and now they're going to have to create the future out of that. So these little children are responding to the situation in which they find themselves. Now, for the rest of us observing, what's the invitation? Because we're part of that group, is to say, are we going to allow this to happen? What is causing refugee problems in Syria or elsewhere? It is warfare, and who are the perpetrators of these war? Who are the people who are making money out of this process? Is it armament makers? Is it the oil industry? Is it politicians? Who's benefiting from this kind of behavior? So it's a wake-up call for us as to how we're doing life on planet Earth. But the little children didn't sign up to be refugees, nor did the Jews sign up to be kind of victims of a Holocaust. They signed up to take part in a drama which had no script, no plot, but the characters whom they knew from previous incarnations and a sense of purpose for this mission.
My question is, when a soul incarnates into a body of a child and there's not a memory, then as the child grows, they're learning lessons, and maybe really deep lessons, but they're not conscious that they're learning these lessons. And then when the soul gets older and they start understanding what we're all talking about here, about your mission and the lessons you're learning. And at some point in this incarnation, once you have this awareness, then your soul decides to return. But in the early time, when the soul does not know, is not awakened, and then they are awakened, does the soul who now is awakened, are they more aware of lessons they learned before they understood? I mean, are they able to kind of, in retrospect, say, oh, that's a lesson I learned, that's a lesson I learned as a child? Or are those lessons more kind of survival lessons as opposed to cosmic lessons?
Great question, Patricia. So the thing is, it's not the souls who are learning the lessons in a sense. It's the ego of the incarnated individual. And you have to realize that the vast bulk of our learning is done at an unconscious level. If we had to keep in consciousness everything we actually learned, we'd be overblown immediately. And this is the difficulty, for instance, with autistic children, Asperger's. What happens is the guards were put in place so that we don't get overloaded. They're broken down. Our defense mechanisms against overload is broken down, and they have access to this extraordinary amount of information. So you get autistic children who are geniuses at mathematics or music or whatever, because the filtering system for the brain, which protects us against overload, is deficient in some way. And so, in fact, they have a lot more information consciously available to them. So the vast bulk of our learning is done at an unconscious level, and it drives our behavior. It becomes part of our, what I call a personal cosmology. And the idea of enlightenment is to try to bring more and more of that learning to consciousness. But we're learning unconsciously from all these things, whether or not we're aware of it. So, we unconsciously learn how to breathe, how to, the eye flicker, the kind of startle reflex that's built into the system. You learn how to drive a car. You don't have to think about it anymore because that goes into the unconscious, because consciousness is very, very limited. Consciousness can only handle between 5 and 40 bits of information a second. The unconscious can handle 40 million bits of information per second. So it's a much, much, much more efficient mechanism for learning and for storing information. Now, the soul in its progress then is building upon all of the previous learnings of previous incarnations. So when you incarnate, for the 41st time, on the way back down from being a soul, you pass through various stages of what Hinduism will call the 7 levels of body. So you go from a soul, at level 6, down to kind of the causal body, which is psychic, to the mental body for ratiocination, to the astral body, which contains emotions, to the etheric body, which creates energy, and then to the physical body, which we call ourselves. And you pick up all the information from the previous incarnations on the way down, and it's stored unconsciously. But like everything you've learned unconsciously, it drives your behavior. For the first 2 years of your life in this incarnation, you probably have no memory whatsoever about anything that happened. But who you are today is largely a result of the experiences you had during those first years. And so the fact that you don't have conscious recall over them doesn't mean that they're not huge influences in your thinking and your behavior right now. And the same thing is true of past lifetimes. It's built in. Is hardwired into the baby as it's born each time. So even if we don't have conscious recall over it, we're being driven and formed by it. And then the idea is that in a subsequent incarnation, that we will try to wake up to the realization of all the past growing and get access to it so that we can speed up our evolutionary trajectory in this present incarnation.
From my own experience, there are souls that incarnate and they don't wake up in that incarnation.
Yes.
But are the lessons that they learned consciously carried over to the next incarnation?
Yes. Yeah. You never get rid of any previous learning, even if it's gone unconscious and you don't have recall over it in a particular incarnation. It's part of who you are and part of the soul's evolution. Yeah. You lose nothing ever.
Thank you.